So, like most people, um, when there's a big shooting, like there was in Orlando there, my reactions evolved over the course of a day or two, or even a week. I am going to combine a number of reactions here at this point, and then do a bunch more afterwards. But this is reactions from the first day, uh, from the 12th and 13th of June. My initial reaction was, I guess that the right thing to say is that I've become entirely desensitized to mass shootings. At this point, I don't know who's responsible. I don't have a name. I don't have an ethnicity. All I know is a bunch of people died at a nightclub. In fact, I don't even think I know that it's a gay nightclub. I guess the way I react is something like this. There's a lot of problems with mental illness, poverty, inequality, and the correlated collection of issues in the United States. Therefore, they need more money for services, more wealth redistribution, more resources for integration, more attention on changing social attitudes, etc. However, the deeply anti-intellectual culture in the country, fostered by elites through media and by politicians, rejects this in favor of continued militarization in the police and in the army. Therefore, they're fucked until they change their attitude. Hey, look. A cloud. The way I see it is that mass shootings are an expected result of American culture, and no sane person could look at the culture and expect anything different. So I'm really not shocked. It's just another one. Expected. It would be shocking if Americans just randomly stopped shooting each other for no good reason. Just, I know a lot of people that see something like that and they're surprised, and you go through this whole big spiel, and it's really just a lot of drama at this point, isn't it? I mean, you can't really be as surprised as you're pretending you are, can you? It happens all the time. And of course, you're going to hear people talk about gun control. And you're going to hear people talk about cops. They need more cops. They need more gun control. They need more cops. They don't. They don't need either of that, okay? What they need is a punch in the face and a collective attitude adjustment. It's a social issue. Okay, it's not a law enforcement issue. It's a social issue. And they need a social revolution to address it. But there's currently almost no understanding of this, and no reason to expect it to stop. And I'm not trolling. I'm really not. It's my honest reaction. I don't want to hear about immigration reform. That has nothing to do with it. I don't want to hear about hiring more cops. That has nothing to do with it. I don't want to hear about gun control either, because that has nothing to do with it. Laws don't solve problems. Jails don't solve problems. Cops don't solve problems. What solves problems is people listening to each other. So that's what I want to hear about. And there's a link here to an article at The Plaza. About the gun violence epidemic in Chicago, and some ideas about how to approach it as a public health issue rather than a law enforcement issue. That would be sane, a sane approach. But you won't hear about a sane approach, okay? You'll just hear bloviating nonsense back and forth. Gun control, immigrants, gun control, immigrants. It's just a bunch of nonsense from both sides. Listen, there's nothing left-wing about gun control. Left-wing means less government. Okay, it means less control by a centralized state. It means decentralization. It means democracy. Passing a decree that everybody has to register their weapons is not left-wing. it's statist, it's authoritarian, it's exceedingly right-wing. A real leftist would approach the issue with a root cause analysis. Remember those? America used to do those, back in the days before this asshole named Reagan came up and destroyed your country. Actually, it's not his fault. He's just the president. They don't tell him anything. But he was the front for a really nasty movement that destroyed your country. But you did used to do things like root cause analysis before that. Maybe you really need to get back to that. That's what a leftist would argue for. Would argue for more funding for mental health services, not gun control, not immigration reform, not cops. But there's no left in the United States. So, we shouldn't expect to hear about sane solutions. We should expect, this hyper-politicized trash to be, you should expect to be bombarded with this hyper-partisan trash that, neither side is presenting any sort of coherent vision that can solve anything. I'm going to stop for a second to change my batteries. And then near the end of the night, after I'd spent the day doing something a little bit more productive than ranting about shootings in a different country, came across an article of Bloomberg that was everything I didn't want to see. And it's exactly what I was talking about. Your choice is to support a candidate that wants to restrict minority rights, wants to pull up the whole tyranny of the majority here, or a candidate that wants to repeal the Second Amendment while acting as a sales agent for overseas arms purchases. So, both of the major candidates want to react to a shooting by taking away people's rights. And then they, bloviate stuff, empty, garbage rhetoric from both of them about America and freedom. And you both want to take away people's rights. That seems to be the solution to everything nowadays in America, is let's take away people's rights. They're equally wrong. I know you want to pick a side, right? You've been conditioned. You want the Reds or the Blues. It's your circus. But they're equally wrong. There's not a good choice. It's one form of right-wing extremism versus another form of it. Neither approach remotely addresses any kind of remotely relevant issue. It just aimlessly pits one demographic against another. Soccer moms versus Hicks. And they hate each other anyways, right? Hey, I got an idea. Maybe they should have a gunfight. They can meet at noon. It's divide and conquer. And then you wonder why we have conspiracy theorists, right? It's almost hard to, you look at what happened, and then you look at the media coverage, and it's hard not to, at least have the thought cross your mind that somebody set this up. Because everybody from every angle is trying to capitalize off of it. They're trying to politicize it. They're trying to use it to work up this group against that group. Nobody is saying anything meaningful. Nobody is providing solutions. Nobody is providing, useful analyses. It's just a lot of people trying to pit a lot of other people against a lot of other people. At the end of the day, we're all winners when we lose. We'll all lose somebody's right. We're all winners because we've all lost some sort of right that we care about, right? it's uh, it's a farce. And as disgusting as the act is, when you see the way people react to it, like it's as disgusting, to watch all the fucking whores in the media fillet all over it, to try to find some angle that they can push some, completely unrelated goal through. If I could find a major media source that was presenting some kind of sane analysis, some kind of coherent reaction, I could almost suffer all the nonsense. I could deal with all the bullshit. If you could get me that one decent source of news and analysis, that one outlet that understands the issue as a mental health problem, that understands that what's happening is about the alienation of society, the alienation, the atomization of individuals in society, the collapse of social cohesion, the ubiquity of neoliberalism. There will be articles written, but you'll need a JSTOR account to read them. In the meantime, I can tell you that one source that's not very much different than any of the other ones, and that's the Young Turks, who pushed the same trash about gun control that you saw everywhere else, because it has to align to it has a demographic, or at least it has a perceived demographic. I think if you read the comment section, it seems to me that the people that watch the Young Turks seem to be kind of right wing. Judging from the comment section, I don't know. Maybe they just get a lot of random comments, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for what they're saying. It's like kind of remarkable even. And so I put my argument there. I was gonna have to make the argument about guns somewhere, and that's where I put it. I have very little love for guns. Okay, if I know there's a gun in a house, I won't go in. But we don't have a constitutional protection on arms up here, so we have different legal mechanisms. The point is just that I'm not opposed to gun control, even while recognizing the legal realities of the Second Amendment, and kind of insisting on the rule of law that applies to whatever country we're talking about. What I am opposed to is conflating the issues. Not because I love guns, I really hate them, but because I know that's a dead end to inaction. People love to blame the gun lobby. It's not the gun lobby. It's the fucking Constitution. And I know it's a dead end to effective policy, because it's not going to work. Because it's not the problem. Canada's a bad comparison because we neither have a gun rights culture nor do we have a strict of a class hierarchy. So if I'm trying to determine, we have less gun violence up here. But if we're trying to determine, is that because we have better gun laws or because we have better integration, we have both here, so we can't isolate for that, right? We haven't controlled for the factor that you're trying to test for. So you'll hear that all the time, There's no gun violence in Canada. Well, there is some gun violence in Canada. But if you're proposing the alternate solution or the alternate cause of it being, the rampant collapse of social systems in the United States, that's not here. So you haven't controlled or isolated for that as a possible cause. So you haven't demonstrated your argument. So you can say we have harsher gun laws and be correct, but we also have more integrative social engineering policies. So you can't pick one or the other. Okay, I'd say just the latter is more important myself. That would be my intuition. Although note that we had an ISIS-inspired attack on Parliament Hill a few years ago. It was just, it was some crazy person, probably very similar to this. Somebody that was just mentally ill. Okay, and we have had less frequent mass shootings, but we have had some mass shootings. There was one of a historical importance in Montreal in the 80s, which brought in a gun control mechanism that was dismantled by the previous government, but was actually very popular. Well, it probably didn't work to prevent any massacres, but it was a very useful tool for law enforcement. It was a gun registry. So how did the cops use it? The way the cops use the gun registry is that if they had a domestic violence dispute and they showed up, they could check to see, okay, are there guns in the house, or are there registered guns in the house? If they know there are registered guns in the house, then they'll react differently than if they don't. Right? Useful tool, I support it, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this, right? And we've also had other massacres that use weapons like knives and explosives. There was a massacre in Calgary not too long ago where I think it was 5 people were knifed. And we've had people blow themselves up, right? Look at, this is an extreme example, but look at Gaza, right? You can twist the data around every day, every which way you want, and not really get anywhere with it, right? You can argue one argument or the other. We need to bring in other places in the world that we can have this discussion about to try to, Canada's just a bad comparison. Other than maybe to point out that, okay, if you have a society with integrative social engineering policies and strict gun control, together those things work well. Comparably. We're not perfect. I pointed out a few issues, but comparably we're pretty good, right? Well, let's look at France. France has some pretty strong gun control laws, but it also has a very poorly integrated migrant underclass as a consequence of its history of colonialism in northern Africa. So you get these Muslim ghettos full of Algerians that face all kinds of barriers to full participation in society, riots, gang violence, and mass shootings, okay? If they had weaker gun control laws, would it be worse? I don't know. But I think it's pretty clear that the strict gun control laws haven't resolved anything, and you wouldn't expect it to, because it's not the root cause of the issue. Now, I didn't put it in here, but you could also bring Switzerland in as an example. Switzerland has very lax gun control laws. In fact, the whole Second Amendment thing in the United States is very Swiss in origin. Switzerland is a country right in the middle of Europe. It also has very low levels of inequality, very functioning social engineering and wealth redistribution systems. You don't hear about massacres in Switzerland. So if we look at these 4 things, okay, it seems to be that it's not the gun laws that make the difference. Again, that doesn't mean I support, I don't think people should buy, assault rifles. What good does an assault rifle do to anybody? Okay, so I'm not opposed to gun control in this space. I don't oppose background checks, and I don't see any reason why you should have assault rifles for sale. Okay? But supporting that doesn't, just because I agree with you doesn't mean I think it's going to be effective, okay? In fact, I think it's disingenuous to think that it's going to solve anything. I will predict the future. One day the gun control advocates will get their way and launch a war on guns. I don't want to say that nothing will change, because something did change with the war on drugs. You ended up with more black people in jail on drug charges, and less white people in jail on drug charges. And that's what you're going to get with stricter gun laws. If you Give the cops the power to go after guns. They won't. They'll go after blacks. They'll use it as an excuse to put black people in jail, and they'll look the other way when white people have guns, okay? And you'll end up with white people open carrying, down the boulevard, and, black people in jail for toy guns. You'll end up with black kids being shot because they're playing with toy guns. The minority will get arrested, and the whites won't. And 20 or 30 years later, you'll get a movement to stop the war on guns. Meanwhile, another generation will pass that is just that much more damaged by a culture of gun violence. A lot of people are pointing fingers at religion and patriarchy and the media and the political class, and I'm not going to argue with you. You're right. It's just when I made that argument, I was talking about the war economy. When I said it's the culture and you should expect it from the culture, it's because of the culture of war, the glorification of war, the glorification of soldiers, veterans, the war economy. That's what I was getting at when I blamed the culture. We're constantly being drummed up for it. We glorify the violence. Not just at the military level either, it's also at the police level. And when you live in a society that teaches you that violence is the solution to problems, that glorifies it, nobody should be surprised when it manifests itself in daily life. That should be expected. And then I hit Google. Started looking. It struck me as kind of obvious that, if there were stricter gun laws, the people that would be most affected would be minorities. And I did find 2 articles of interest. One of them is a historical article explaining that, in fact, gun control in the United States has been used in the past as a tool to control minorities. Now, I don't have the background required to check any of it, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And when you hear a barely reformed Dixiecrat like Clinton make this the center of her platform, just a few decades after her husband used criminal justice reform for the same purposes, it's a red flag, my friend. Choices are terrible. I have to tune out. I'm just going to drive myself mad at, the insanity of the options before the American people, and therefore before the world, as America is the empire. And if I don't shut up, I might see myself get shot. There's also an article here at Salon that extrapolates on what I was saying. And we can listen to some Dead Kennedys too if we'd like. Always up for JELLO.